Welcome, Wargamers, to the bloodied battlefields of the mortal realms, because today we are jumping right into the thick of it with the blood god himself, Khorne. He is, in my opinion, the big brother of the chaos god household, right? Vicious on the battlefield and made within the realm of chaos from the very emotions of rage and hate and bloodlust. And so today we are going to unpack everything there is about Khorne, specifically in the framework of Age of Sigmar. Because if you don't know, GW uses the same deities in 40k as they do for AOS. We're going to talk about his followers here, the plans, and what Khorne has done to really shape the mortal realms. Now, if you're a longtime viewer on the show, you know that most of my content is very, very short, and then lately I've been putting them into compilations. Well, people seem to really like the longer form of content to just tune out while you're painting and stuff. So I thought I would try a video, rather than doing a lore week of short videos, putting out one big one. So it is very important to me. Just let me know if you like this change or not. Not everything's going to be super long. I'll do short videos as well, but for big lore ones where I'm trying to revamp a series, this seems smart. Now, with all that said, let's chat about the Blades of Khorne. Now, that name of the battle tome, right? Blades of Khorne. That is what you're going to need to play this army. And Blades of Khorne is a catch-all term referring to all of the blood god's forces, mortal and demon. But to understand either side of this army, we're going to need to first get a glimpse at the big guy at the top. What is Khorne like as a god? Well, Khorne is the chaos god of murder, of war, of martial honor, of hatred, of rage. And as long as there have been minds, there has been war, making Khorne truly one of the most primordial beings to exist. And in many cases, or at least in many times, seems to be the strongest amongst his brothers, but we'll get to that in a second. You see, since so many of Khorne's favorite things are combat-based, this isn't a deity who's all about raising grand temples. There's no regular church services, no potlucks, no trunk or treat. And that's because Khorne's altar is the battlefield. He is worshipped in the shedding of blood and the slaughtering of your enemies. But also, Khorne cares not from where the blood flows, only that it flows. And the way that you engage in and raise up this church is to keep the blood flowing. What you can kill and bleed in the name of Khorne is the only offering he cares about. And to that end, earlier I said they don't build temples, and that's true certainly in a traditional sense. However, Khorne immortals will build giant pyramids of skulls, almost like a cairn, as an offering to Khorne. But it's not like a stable, we're going to be in this temple for forever, thousands of years type thing. The reason they build skull pyramids is because it's a reflection of their god in his realm, sometimes called the realm of brass and blood. It occupies a huge portion of the realm of chaos, Khorne space. And if you can imagine a scene with me, right? Imagine an open field where you can see horizon to horizon, and the entire ground is just skulls. It's not that you can't see the ground under the skulls, because there isn't a ground under the skulls. It is just skulls. But it doesn't look boring because it's broken up by rivers of molten lava. There are skulls from every species, every banner, every year of history. Any king who thinks that they were ever anything becomes nothing but a trophy in Khorne's realm. And of course, this realm also has scenic locations if you were to go visit, with the family. You got lakes of blood, rings of volcanoes, gladiatorial pits, all that kind of stuff. But at the center, dominating all of this, is the Brass Citadel, the home of Khorne himself. And we're in the realm of chaos, so physical limitations of buildings and stuff like that, they don't really apply. This is a citadel of unimaginable size. Within it houses the Great Skull Throne. This is the seat of Khorne himself, and sort of like the thing that all these little warlords building their temples of skulls are mimicking. It's where he sits and watches the realms, directs his armies, and judges his servants. And this explains a lot of the chants that we hear often associated with Khorne armies. If you're new to the hobby, you'll hear them enough. It is blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne. Well, that's why he's the god of bloodshed, and this is the Skull Throne. Everyone would love to be able to take down a chieftain or a warlord worthy enough to put their skull on this throne for their lord. Now, unfortunately, we don't have a ton of information about what actively happens in the Realm of Chaos. There's been a lot of lore stating that the Chaos Gods, Khorne, Slaanesh, Tzeentch, Nurgle, and now the Great Horned Rat, are all constantly fighting in there. As a deity's power swells, their kingdom, their borders in the Realm of Chaos will expand as well. Conversely, they'll also retract if they're sort of waning in power. And so what this means is, in narrative arcs where like Tzeentch is ascendant, his literal real estate will expand. Same goes here for Khorne. But there's a secret trick here that Khorne has. Sure, his walls might retract a smidge here and there, but never too far. Because there's ultimately a great conundrum that if you're a rules lawyer, you've already figured out about the great game. That is a contest of 5 Chaos Gods, and they're all trying to fight each other to see which one's the greatest / will be the last. The caveat here is that a whole bunch of fighting amongst the other gods, and if Nurgle raises an army and goes and conquers the realms and stuff like that, there's still war happening. There's still bloodshed. There's still rage. It all still feeds Khorne at least a little bit. Much in the same way that when Khorne sweeps through an area and kills everybody, if he leaves the bodies to rot, Nurgle will begin to get a little bit of, excess power from this because of the putrefaction. And when you think about everything that has to do with war and combat and rage, whether it's a Tzeentch cult uprising, a Nurgle army, or a pleasure cult of whatever it might be, it means generally Khorne is more ascendant than his brothers, like I said, in general, or at least more often he's king of the hill before getting quickly knocked down a peg. Right, once Khorne is on top, for example, Slaanesh and Tzeentch will team up to knock him down and then betray each other, rinse and repeat. So none of these things are very permanent. When I talk about him seeming the most powerful or ascendant, it's all very hand-wavy, as is the nature of all things chaos. It's constantly eating itself. But we did definitely get the sense, or at least in the early lore, that Khorne is one that just very regularly comes to be king of the hill in their little chaos realm. Now, other things to note about the great blood god himself. He's always had an eye for the realm of fire, Aqshy. Its raging volcanoes, ashen plains, it just really resonates with him. I mean, it makes sense. It looks like an extension of his world. We'll talk about Khorne's actions within the realms, but I wanted to note here up front that while he does have the greatest covetous eye for Aqshy overall, Khorne armies exist in every single realm. Like, none of the Chaos Gods were willing to so fully dedicate themselves to a single location that they all exist everywhere. Wherever there are skulls and or blood, there will be a Khorne army with a warlord who's desperately trying to earn glory. Now, wherever they do end up, the general goal of a Khorne army is to conquer and corrupt the land, so much so that Khorne's kingdom in the realm of chaos can almost bleed into reality. So, I used to think it was like, oh, they want to build a door so big that Khorne can walk through and be in the realms. And that's not really true. It's more like they're trying to acid dissolve the wall rather than build a door. It's not about Khorne coming through. It's about removing the barrier that separates him from ever being in a different room. We see glimpses of this. There are places that have a permanent corruption. In the early Realmgate War books, I think it was Gates of Azir, they featured a corrupted realm gate by Khorne. It's super rad. And as I mentioned before, within the great game of the Chaos Gods, they all take turns knocking each other, from ascendancy, but traditionally, Khorne's biggest personal enmity is against Slaanesh because he hates the prancing, enjoyment, the glee, the ecstasy, all that kind of stuff. But to be honest, it all seems to vary from which era of Games Workshop lore you pull from. Because if you go back to older stuff, I definitely got the impression, I thought I had like a Mandela effect thing going on, or I don't know. But I was like, he hates Tzeentch. He has so much anti-magic crap. The dude hates Tzeentch. And sure enough, I found some old books, like old white dwarfs, that say that. But I definitely got the sense in AOS that Tzeentch and Nurgle have a bigger rivalry between change and stagnation, and Khorne and Slaanesh have a bigger rivalry between, I'm going to say, seriousness and giddiness. Regardless, it doesn't really matter because it changes, right? They're all against whoever's currently ascendant. But regardless of that, Khorne is one of the biggest players in the fate of the mortal realms, and we're going to cover important events later. But to bring you up to speed with where his armies are, like what the Blades of Khorne, capital B, capital K, are and how we got here, is that back in the Age of Myth, there were several tribes among the fiery plains of Akshi. To their seers, shaman, and elders, Khorne began to whisper. Whisper of conquest, of might, of sacrifice, of the old ways before all this fancy civilization got here when Sigmar showed up and tried making everybody smart city slickers. Just to pause here, the book, The Red Feast by Gav Thorpe, is a fantastic example of this, and I'm going to praise that book at least 3 more times during this video. But it talks about this pivotal moment of Khorne's whisperings becoming reality and what it looks like for those initial tribes to fall to chaos before chaos truly tore into the realms. But anyway, with these smaller tribes corrupted, the first tears into the realm of chaos began to appear shortly afterwards. And with it came the demonic hordes of the Blood God. This allowed them to conquer more tribes. And as they were defeated, a simple choice was made. Join us or die. Now, death meant your skull was tossed onto the pile like so many others. Most likely, they'll cannibalize your body in an hour or so. But joining means a terrible fate of constant war, where the only 2 directions you can go are to the top or into the grave. This choice is known colloquially before it became a game format as the Path to Glory. It used to be a Chaos Army specific thing, but it's a core aspect of every Chaos God and their followers. Every demon and mortal who joins the Khorne banner is making a bargain with the god himself, essentially. If I promise to corrupt the realms in your name, Khorne, you promise to make me powerful, immortal, insert whatever thing you're looking for as your personal warlord story. And the path to glory is basically you starting at square zero. You need to earn the favor of Khorne. He rewards you with a little bit to help you achieve like 1 step closer to whatever goal got you in this place at the start. And then you have to do a little bit more for Khorne, and he gives you another step towards your goal. And this dynamic of him delivering on promises and you delivering on being a good follower of Khorne is colloquially called the Path to Glory. Now, it can look a lot of different ways for a lot of different people, but fundamentally, it's a promise. Everything we talk about is built upon this promise, right? You need to please Khorne. You need to keep the blood flowing, keep the skulls rolling, and he will make good on his promises and give you what you seek. When people ask of various chaos gods, like, why would you follow this god? People they don't like the mutations of Tzeentch or the grossness of Nurgle or something like that. Khorne has always been one of those armies that people just go like, oh yeah, I get that. Right? When you're given the choice of join or die, and not everyone's as blatantly mutated or immediately repulsive, it's like, you know what? Okay, I can figure this out. But it's important to keep that in mind because any unit that you look at in this range of miniatures is thematically somewhere on their own personal path to glory. Skull Reaper number 4 is just on a different step of that journey than Blood Reaver number 6 or 60. Now, one more thing I want to touch on here as we're talking about the general nature of Khorne as a deity. I can't go too far without talking about the hatred Khorne has for magic. Khorne sees sorcery as weak, dishonorable, and immediately deserving of death. In fact, a ton of his units are based around having anti-wizard rules and abilities. There's even an entire artifact known as the Collar of Khorne, which essentially makes a sort of magic null in a radius. Or at least that's what it's traditionally done. It's like a dampener for anything arcane. Wizards who enter that area of effect, or, more likely, the collar's around a Fleshhound and the Fleshhound finally got to your line, you're going to be disoriented, you're going to be unable to channel abilities. It's almost like your mind scrambles a little bit, specifically when it comes to sorcery. But that does not leave the servants of the Blood God empty-handed when it comes to otherworldly impacts of their deity. Instead of magic, Khorne and his servants revere priests, a direct beseeching to the deity himself that can result in all kinds of effects, even manifestations to tear into reality. The rules have varied on how this is depicted, but a lot of times there's an ability for a priest to hurt a nearby unit, to increase their prayer power. In our edition now, I think it's the ritual points. But it goes along with that blood sacrifice idea, and it fits the army perfectly. These priests are oftentimes how Khorne will deliver his will to his followers, right? Maybe the priest will begin to have portents or dreams pulling them to the west or to a certain realm. And so my point here is, even if there's no magic, there's still a very tangible and close connection between the divinity and his followers. It's a very, very active relationship, which, you love to see it. So what are his armies like? So with Khorne fleshed out, we look at what the man at the top is. His desire is clear and simple. He wants blood and skulls. But what kind of army or society do those values create? Well, the cultural carrots and sticks here are essentially, the carrot is immortal power in the form of a demon prince, and the stick is becoming a chaos spawn or death, right? What kind of person does that create? As always, this is a place where I always want to point out that hobbyists can go wild and make whatever army or character motivations they want. You can have a sympathetic Khorne warlord who wants to avenge his people, so you take it easy on the mutations and the monsters and the demons, you keep it simple. You could go the full steam other direction. You can do whatever you want. There's a wide array of examples in the lore of what armies look like, but what I'm going to discuss next is the archetypical Khorne format. But keep in mind, there's no Codex Astartes or anything that anyone's trying to conform to. And so I want to start our discussion by making a distinction between the demon legions and the mortal armies. Yes, they work together. And fun fact, if you're coming over from 40k, in Age of Sigmar, demons don't seem to nearly have the same instability problem they did in 40k. It seems like once demons pop through the wall, like the barrier between Realm of Chaos and the Mortal Realms, they can subsist. My source for this is Nagash Undying King has a plague bearer, essentially captain, who just marches along with the army in the crusade. He doesn't dissipate or anything like that. So we're already kind of working with a little bit of a different rule set, because the demons are trying to achieve different things. When you're stable, you can have longer term goals other than just wreak havoc in my immediate area. But at the end of the day, they are still somewhat simple creatures, right? Demons in Age of Sigmar are essentially a fragment of their patron, an aspect of Khorne shaped into a form, given varying levels of animus or consciousness, and set out to do the will of the greater whole. What constitutes each kind of demon just has to do with what role Khorne has for it. And so basically you're going to get more power and more brain power and a longer leash if you need to do a job that would require those things. It's all about utility. So for example, bloodhounds, or fleshhounds rather, are at the bottom with just enough sentience to run forward and really enjoy ripping things apart, because that's all they have to do. On the other end of the spectrum, you have something like the greater demons, right? The bloodthirsters, who have tons of power, but also a ton of autonomy and intelligence to be able to do campaign planning and coordinate battles and surprise enemies and all these kinds of things. Demons gain more personality, more independence as they escalate in power. And so what this means is you can talk to a bloodthirster. There's dialogue in certain books between greater demons and their pawns, but I don't know if you could really have a conversation with a bloodletter. If you can think of a section, please let me know. Now, demons have always been in an interesting space to me when it comes to Age of Sigmar. They're awesome to have. The models vary. Sometimes newer stuff looks amazing. Sometimes older stuff gets a little bit rough. And in every scene that they show up in a Black Library novel, they dominate the scene. And to me, their most powerful impact, both in a thematic sense and possibly tabletop back when you could, was the idea of summoning them. I love this idea of corrupting things so badly that demons pour out, which has worked in varying degrees on the game table, over the years, but thematically is a really cool idea, which is why I think they keep trying it. Khorne demons are some of my favorites amongst all the gods. I'll talk about a few of them when we get to notable units. But as far as how the army is structured and ordered and its ethos and stuff like that, Demons fit into kind of the eccentricities of their god, right? Khorne favors the number 8. So we have 8 legions of 8 mighty cohorts, and each is led by a cabal of 8 of the wickedest warriors who work 8 days a week, 8 hours a day for $8 an hour. You get the idea. The man likes 8. And a more rigid organization makes sense if you consider that these are aspects of himself, right? He can expand or contract the size of his legions as his power waxes and wanes, but it's a good solid structure, whereas things get much more loosey-goosey when we talk about the mortals. Any mortal tribe who worships Khorne is collectively called the Bloodbound. Now, an important thing to note here is that not all cultures perceive Khorne the same. They can each view him through their own religious, ethnic, or cultural lenses. And this was really emphasized when the game Warcry first came out. There was a whole suite of warbands that worship deities that didn't quite align with the chaos gods as we know them. So a tribe may revere, the old brass bull. They go out and hunt other tribes, take captives, and spill their blood on the tribe's farms so that crop yields increase. That's a micro view of a small tribe that is actively feeding Khorne. But they wouldn't immediately recognize that name or iconography. Again, this is another point where hobbyists can go nuts. Who do you have them worshipping? But I feel that once an army reaches a certain size, once the demonic influence has reached a point of critical mass, all roads lead to understanding the name and true nature of Khorne. And so those biggest armies will be able to speak plainly to one another about the nature and will of their god. It's just the small tribes that might not know. Regardless of their perception of Khorne, these values tend to bend societies into certain molds. For example, this is a meritocracy. Plain and simple. You earn merit by fighting and surviving. You can also earn it by making pacts and pledges with demons, but at the end of the day, you have to deliver on war and claiming skulls. But let's go from a fixed perspective, right? Let's travel through the tribe, and let's say your tribe just got rolled over. You're on your knees and you're given the choice, death or joining the Khorne warband before you. And you agree. What happens? Well, just like the Stormcast, you're immediately taken to a large feasting hall, which is good. The problem is, you will be feasting on the rest of your tribe who was just killed. This meal is deeply symbolic and meaningful. This is an average Khorne warrior making that initial pact, the one that sets them on the path to glory. I will take this blood and I will eat this flesh. I will pledge myself to this warband. I will spill more blood and claim more skulls. To what end is up to that warrior. Maybe it's to rise through the ranks and kill the warlord who did this to you. Maybe it's not altruistic. Maybe you just want to be on the winning side and your tribe lost, and so you're going to follow the stronger power because it's a dog-eat-dog world. This initiation process is what makes you a blood reaver. It'll fill your mind with rage, hate. It's almost like the meal becomes imbued with Khorne's power because of that pact, that promise. And so that's why they're all like super jacked and ripped. It's Khorne granting immediate strength. He's delivering on the first taste of his promise immediately. Now the path you go on from this point, like within your particular bloodbound tribe, can vary greatly. If you survive long enough as a blood reaver, your rage will become a little less blinding. Like all these things are just escalations. You get more angry, but instead of becoming more belligerently angry, you instead kind of become like honed to a sword point. You get tempered, I guess is kind of the way that I would say it. And kind of the next level or the next elevational step in terms of being a valuable part of your particular warband is to become a blood warrior. This is your elite Khorne fighter, covered in heavy plate armor. They're much more like the Chaos Warriors, whereas the Blood Reavers are more like Marauder types in terms of their armaments and loadout and stuff like that. And this is where things really start to diversify because there's a lot of ways forward. You could just stay a blood warrior and become a more valuable part of your team, a more cunning leader, become a leader of a squad. Then all of a sudden you're in the inner circle of the champion, ready to challenge them. That's a very linear, straightforward kind of progression. It requires strength and cunning, all that kind of stuff. But there's also a few ways that you can expedite your progress along the path to glory by making essentially deals with the devil. Every of the Chaos Deity battle tomes has a set of trials that these gods' adherents can try to do. If you succeed, you earn a super favor from them. Because it's essentially like saying, hey, Khorne, notice me, right? Like you're making a big promise, and if you deliver on it, well, by delivering on it, you're doing a disproportionate amount of Khorne's will, right? Making him happy, so he pours blessings. So success will earn you great favor, but like I said, speed you along the path, where failure means at best spawndom, or some other worst fate. I mean, there's a couple of other real contenders for terrible fates out there. And on the tabletop, this is where we get units like the Skull Reapers and the Wrathmongers, right? Warriors whose forms are being corrupted by the blessings of Khorne, coming at them so fast and furious. As an example, the Skull Reapers have a pact that they're going to take 8 worthy skulls a day. It doesn't matter if they're friends, it doesn't matter if they're enemies, it's a pact that must be fulfilled. So what we call a unit of Skull Reapers is a group of warriors who are on this same kind of pact together. Now, none of these mortals, right, survive for very long, right? Everybody's here for a good time, not for a long time. But as these grand battles churn through warriors, right, the best and the brightest will inevitably kind of sift their way to the top. People who can take more and more blessings, who don't overextend themselves, both, I guess, kind of pseudo-politically amongst other warlords, but then also like promising too much to Khorne than they can deliver on. It takes a shrewdness. But if you can do that, you become one of those heroes that others want to emulate. People who can deliver on exactly what Khorne wants. They keep Khorne's attention, and so others want to be around this hero, caught in their orbit, so hopefully Khorne sees them too. There is, in my opinion, from my perspective, a distinct sense of importance among the upper echelon of the Khorne Bloodbound that I feel is somewhat missing in other Chaos factions. It might be like alluded to in lore, but I feel like on the tabletop, nobody does heroes within Chaos quite like Khorne does. Because they're all built around a cult of personality, tied to whoever the axe wielder at the top is. They surround themselves with the best heroes of, their legions, whatever they have. And so that's why we have cool, like, kind of sub-heroes, right? Skull Grinders, Deathbringers. These are all champions that have risen to the top over countless ages or battles or whatever it might be. Again, making their own pacts, their own oaths have brought them down different roads, and so they bring a different utility to any bloodbound horde they're a part of. Now, as far as a Khorne army goes, when it's roving across the land, these armies are generally pretty light and mobile for kind of obvious reasons, right? When you have a bunch of guys, and I mean people, so it's not just the men and women who are fighting, but also like the family and the tribes behind them, slave pits, all that kind of stuff that you think Chaos armies would have. They just go from place to place and they eat everything around them like a swarm of locusts. You got to keep this war machine going that requires food and water and resources. Not to mention, the general way of Khorne is to just kind of smash into things and overtake them like a wave. Not a lot of prolonged sieges, if you will. I mean, there are some, but those are certainly circumstances where like a particular kind of cunning warlord who knows how to use those things always rises to the top. Now, of course, as far as like the tribe constantly being in motion, there are also examples of that not being the case. Neferata, I think it's Dominion of Blood? I always get Blood and Bone confused on the book titles, but she is fighting a Khornate army, who is notable within this book as it's being led by a warlord who took control of a city, and instead of just sacking it and leveling it, hoarding all the food and water he can take and moving on, he's trying to like settle it. He wants to use it for his war machine instead of just pillaging. And so there are, Khorne warlords who want to establish kingdoms, even if they just exist to like make weapons or something. But again, even in that, it's a meritocracy. Everyone needs to deliver on what they're being demanded of. So when you look at a Khorne army kind of from a broader perspective, what it really is a large mass of small war bands that are almost operating like gangs internally amongst themselves. You're thrown in with a rabble, you guys stay together for sheer like safety in numbers from all the other blood warriors and skull reapers who are out there. You're trying to navigate a very complex system of warriors who are all looking for glory for different reasons. Your job is to rise to the top of whatever group you're a part of and always be looking for an opportunity to jump to the next level, the next step on your path. So while armies can be abstract, build whatever you like, collect whatever models you like, that format already exists within the lore of the Khorne Bloodbound because they are these kind of conglomerations of gangs that it's just warlords bending the will of subordinates below them. But when you magnify that to the size of a continent, like Korgus Kull's army is, right? He has that air of charisma, that cult of personality we mentioned. It becomes something that is enormous. And I love the freedom that we have to design our own ideal war bands. I don't normally play with named characters for that reason. I really like making my own stories. But within this battle tome, there are 3 named characters that I really want to spend some time talking about. There are others, but these are the 3 that I think exemplify the faction. The kind of thing that if you were going to tell a friend about your army to get them stoked, right, the stuff you wouldn't want to leave out. My top 3 picks are Skarbrand, Khorne, and Korgus Kull. So we'll start off with Skarbrand. He's a super fun character. Essentially, if you could in your mind, imagine a bloodthirster. He was actually once Khorne's favorite bloodthirster and the most powerful one too, which means the most personality, the most intelligence, the most autonomy, all of that. But one day, a Lord of Change began to whisper into this particular bloodletter's ear. You're greater than Khorne. Look at those lesser demons he's breaking himself into. Surely the big guy on the skull throne, that's like an illusion, kind of like the Wizard of Oz, because he's pouring so much power out elsewhere. I'm pretty sure that you could take him. And I don't know if that Tzeentch demon rolled like a nat 20 on his persuasion or something like that, because Skarbrand fell for it and he lashed out against Khorne himself. Which turns out was a very silly and poor decision, because this is equivalent to you being in a fist fight with a flea. But Khorne loved the moxie and came up with a very fitting punishment. So this punishment began, for all of his rebellion. The first thing that he did was blast away Skarbrand's wings. This is why we have the tattered wings that don't fly anymore for his model. So off the bat, he's a bloodthirster who cannot fly. Then Khorne cracks him over the head so hard it reveals part of his skull, and it forces him to go insane. So no longer is he able to lead armies and campaigns. He is the kind of gibbering rage insanity. So he has all the strength of a bloodthirster, but none of the utility of one in terms of being a leader. And lastly, Khorne turned him into a personal yo-yo with a collar. And I kind of mean that. Skarbrand never gets to rest anymore, and he never will. Khorne chucks him from one fight where he will be unleashed in full fury. Again, he can't control himself. He's turned to 11 all the time. And then when that fight's over, Khorne scoops him up and fastball throws him right into the next fight. Again and again and again. And so seeing Skarbrand means Khorne has at least looked at your situation. There's some personal divine element to him being there, but also you do not want him there. He's had varying levels of usefulness on the tabletop over the years, but narratively he's a ton of fun because in the early campaign books, when he showed up, he really stole the scene. He's unstoppable, and it's a blast for it. And I also like that he is a named character with a built-in reason to be a part of literally any army. Regardless of the rest of the lore you wrote for your Khorne warband or whatever, the premise could always be those guys are there, and also Khorne thought this would be fun. Boom, Skarbrand's in the list. Which I love when characters have sort of a tie into why they would be at any given place, both in the realms and with any given army. Now next up is Khorne. This is Khorne's hunting dog. So fleshhounds are the creature that he is, and they're just cool in general, right? Khorne dogs, can't get past the Khorne dog meme. They're silly, they're fun, and we see them a lot actually as gifts given to champions. One of the original Mighty Lord of Khorne models, or Korgus Kull mini, was actually a lord walking with a fleshhound next to him. And because this is one of those examples, again, of a gift being given by Khorne, the fleshhound is there to basically ward off sorcerers because he has a collar of Khorne on him, and of course attack enemies when they get close to their charge. But the fleshhound also acts as a constant eye for Khorne. not letting that hero slip up for even a moment on their path to glory, and so it is both a treat and a threat. It's something you only get when you are further along the path. But Karanak is a named fleshhound. He has no master but Khorne himself, and Khorne has seen fit to give him some spark of intelligence. Just like, Skarbrand is a bloodthirster that is had his mind shattered, so he doesn't have the mental capacity to lead armies. Karanak is an independent agent who does, even though it's a dog's body. And just as the name implies, he basically uses him as a hunting dog. When Khorne wants someone brought to him, he lets loose the hounds. And what does this mean? So you've essentially been marked for death by Khorne. Any psychic powers that you have innately are going to begin to flicker. The eye of Khorne is already upon you. No matter what realm you are in, no matter how far you go, those dogs are coming for you. You're going to have nightmares every single night of being chased. You'll hear them howling throughout the day like you're being followed by a pack of them. And they just don't stop at anything until they get their prey. And the idea could be to bring him back, whether it's like a Khorne warlord who needs to answer for failure. It could be a target of, a person of order. They're hard to stop. Because Karanak rarely ever goes anywhere alone. He can command hounds near him into his service, but he becomes like an instant alpha. And I love this because it adds a bit of depth to what could otherwise be a boring unit. I mean, they're demons, which is awesome. I love the idea of demons, but in their particular form, they are just much more animal. But this is like, hey, they're not just dogs. They're hellhounds that can fade between reality and stuff like that and have a supernatural hunting power. It's very cool. And lastly is my boy, Khorgis Kull. And I'm going to once again suggest everyone read The Red Feast by Gav Thorpe. This is the story of a mortal who was a chieftain of one of the first tribes that fell to Khorne, or was amongst the tribes when the fall started to happen. That's not a spoiler. This was like back in the Age of Myth, so we're talking like 600-ish years ago, something like that. So it's interesting to have a character who was there on the precipice when this happened. Now, the reason he's able to live for so long is, again, that path to glory. He keeps making promises to Khorne. Khorne extends his life because he's been a good servant so far. We'll roll the dice. And keeps him going. And Khorgis Kull was our first big antagonist of the Realm Gate War series, right? He was leading the bloodbound of the Greater Akshi Plains. He has a long-standing feud with Vandis Hammerhand, Lord Celestant of the Hammers of Sigmar, because Kull wanted to put Vandis's head on the top of his skull pyramid as an offering to Khorne. But in the very, very early parts of, the starting of Age of Sigmar, Vandis struck down the entire pyramid at the last minute, and Khorgis Kull was denied ascension to becoming a demon prince. So lots of enmity, long-term resentment, but it goes both ways because Vandis is like hyper-fixated on Kull. Now, as my understanding goes, there are times in history where Khorgis Kull has been given orders by Archaon, but for the most part, he kind of stays away. He wants his section of Akshi. In the most recent, the last campaign series we had, Khorgis Kull showed up at the end to attack Hammerhall Akshi. And again, he had rebuilt his pyramid, and he wanted to claim the head of a Stormcast Eternal, but he didn't care if it was Vandis. He kind of let that personal grudge go. If I'm not mistaken, he actually ended up killing a previous character named Gavriel Shurheart. Someone correct me if I'm wrong on that. But anyway, he struck down a Stormcast. It wasn't Vandis, but Vandis watched it happen. Khorgis Kull then was lifted up and elevated to Demon Prince. All we know so far is that the world went red, he sprouted wings of blood, and everything became doom. Unfortunately, for everybody involved, Khorne was not the main bad guy in this edition, and so this moment that we've all waited 9 years for was completely overshadowed by Skaven blowing the area up during the Skaventide. This was the big event that marked the current edition that we are in. Now, when the dust settled, Khorgis Kull was gone. Everyone saw him change. They know he's still a thing, but he vanished when the explosion happened. So we're still waiting to see what GW wants to do with him, which I find terribly unsatisfying in this battle, Tom, if I'm perfectly honest with you. They set him up and then did nothing with it. But I have long said that whenever they give me a Demon Prince Khorgis Kull, I will have my Khorne army. because it's a character whose story has been, I think, one of the more interesting and compelling ones. Having someone there who, is adding depth by his story adds depth to Khorne. Khorne is very one note, let's be honest. But when you take a hero who never wanted things to end badly, but is kind of cast into a series of events that leads to all of this, and the way to survive is to just be the biggest fish in the sea, this is what that looks like when that story is taken to 11. And seeing him personally have setbacks, like, rarely do we see warlords, like, get knocked down and then have to, like, figure their stuff out and come back again. A lot of times in these books, the villain is cut down at the end of the story, or it's a named character and they were never going to fail anyway, like a Alariel or Nagash or something like that. They were never going to get killed. But Khorgis has always been one of those characters that, like, he's small enough to just go away, but they keep bringing him back, and the reason is he's fun to read about. He's a cool villain. He was there at the beginning. He's faced trials. He had a deep period of depression and trying to, like, rekindle his love and excitement for murder when he was after his first skull pyramid was struck down. He had his whole moment of just, like, despair trying to figure it out. So it's not just a story of, like, a warlord who keeps trying and failing. It's also like Stella got a groove back halfway through and is just on a real uptick. Because if you remember how big that story was, the army that was bearing down on Hammerhall was, like, apocalyptic in scale. It only stopped because the Skaven did something completely out of left field for everybody. Which means that Khorgis was about to lead the largest Khorne war horde on the city ever. And I think that's pretty dang cool. Noteworthy, if you will. Now, those are, of course, named characters, but I want to talk about a few exemplary units. They're always adding new units to these things. It's hard to keep up, and it feels very hollow to have a lore video for, like, a paragraph. But I wanted to pick out a couple of units that, when you are playing Khorne on the table, either people will visually see it and know exactly what you're playing, or at least be so stimulated by what they're seeing that they want to know more. What the heck is this? Iconic units, stuff like that. My metric for success is always, like, getting people who don't play your game to stop and go, whoa, what's this? Right? Just exposure to the hobby, make it seem interesting and exciting. Now, for me, nothing is more Khorne than Blood Reavers. They are the pinnacle of, quote, Khorne cares not from where the blood flows, only that it flows. Many warlords have made their names by pleasing the blood god with a Zap Brannigan approach to strategery, if you will. Just waves and waves of your own men to find the preset kill limit of whatever the target is. And what I mean by all that is to say, they're chaff. Khorne armies have always, both in 40k and Age of Sigmar, had this element of disposability to them. Sacrifices must be made, and you make it with the cheap units so that your better units can just take the blessings of Khorne and go forward. So they are speed bumps for your enemy, but historically, Khorne has always also had a way of making these very, very minor units swing above their weight class, whether it's charge bonuses, prayers, that kind of stuff. You can field them in hordes, but because you're looking for units to die in Khorne, minimum sized units are better. It's more blood tithe points, which means a more happier blood god. And I was there when AOS 1 released. That box set is so iconic. Those Blood Reavers are just fun to paint. They're just good miniatures. Now, another signature set of units for Khorne here are the Juggernaut Riders. A Juggernaut is another animalistic form that Khorne bends his demons into. Where the Fleshhounds seem very biological, they seem like creatures that might exist, kind of reptilian dog type things. A Juggernaut appears as a steel and brass construct. That's generally in the form of a bull. Now, the Juggernaut is the Blood God's signature mount. Okay, it's a gift he bestows to champions, whether they're mortal or demon. Regardless of the rider, to get one as a mount, you basically have to wrestle it, right? There's a whole pen full of Juggernauts. And you have to be able to subdue it, not only with strength, but with, like, willpower. Because you're essentially binding a demon to your service. So this is not a friendly arrangement with a mount like the Stormcast have with their rides. This is more like two apex predators, and your will has to be supreme to kind of bend you into working together. But if you can, you're both better for it. Blood crushers are what you call them when a demon is riding the back of it, and a skull crusher is what you call it when a mortal rides them. I know of at least one person who has a skull crusher's mortal army, like all cavalry list. Win or lose, it sounds like an absolute blast, because they can be exceptionally tanky, and like I said, all the buffs that the Blessings of Khorne can give them, whether that's, per turn or a basis of a prayer or whatever it is. These are already heavy hitters, so having them swing above their weight class makes them really gross. There's also the Blood Secrator. This is one of the original models in the range that came out with that initial starter set, and it is one of my personal favorites, but it is a killer to paint. This is, to kind of be reductive, it's sort of the banner bearer for Khorne, which sounds very simple, but this is another example of one of those bargains that a mortal can take to basically accelerate their path to glory. Becoming a Blood Secrator involves a lengthy pilgrimage to the doors of Khorne's realm. So I imagine this to mean fighting your way to the most corrupted parts of the realm where reality bleeds into the realm of chaos. There, you'll be given a banner if you are judged worthy. The pact you make is for power and immortality, but also your duty now is to go basically be in constant war, because this is like an icon of Khorne. It is his eye you're carrying. It needs to always be seen in battle. We got a description of it being used, I think it's the book Gates of Azir if I'm not mistaken, but what happens when the Blood Secrator plants the banner. In AOS 1, they had rules where the guy had to not move and actually plant the banner. And as it's described in the book, first of all, it begins to rain blood. As he's kind of working the blood magic up, things become very distorted, clouds go black and red, rain and blood everywhere. But then the second he plants the banner into the ground itself, the blood rain reverses. Now the drops are going up into the sky. And as those drops go up, demons are being pulled up from the ground in that kind of area of effect. So it's almost like the blood rained into the ground, soaked the earth, and then when the earth was pulled up with the rain, there's a demon there. It's like a mini rift that makes the veil between Khorne's realm and reality paper thin. Which thematically, is just the coolest thing ever. That's just pure metal. Of course, I can't mention iconic models without the Bloodthirster, of course. They have everything. They are the perfect silhouette of, the demon archetype. If you went to anyone who has, any kind of religious training or education whatsoever, what is this? That's a demon. It's the Balrog from our Tolkien's. When you think of a demon in the Western tradition, a lot of artwork can be distilled into something like this. It's just very visually evocative. Sadly, to be honest, I wish that there were more stories that included them. It's certainly iconic as a unit. They're constantly there in the Khorne books. Even when they were the small old metal models, they still within the real estate of the book took up an enormous presence in those old fantasy books. But I just think it's underutilized as a device for showing more depth to Khorne, because Bloodthirsters can have different personalities because they can be different aspects of him. I just don't think it's used enough to highlight how varied a Khorne army can be. My personal favorite is the one with the giant two-handed axe. I think it is the coolest. I've thought that since I got the White Dwarf magazine where they were being released. I was so flippin' excited when I saw that. It just looks incredible. Now, as I mentioned before, there are a ton of minor heroes that one could point out when it comes to the Khorne armies. That's kind of like a thing that they have. But I want to end the exemplary unit section with something that I think is going to be essential to you as a player and something you're going to see at darn near every single table, and that's a Slaughter Priest and or a Skull Altar. When Age of Sigmar first started releasing faction terrain, it was started with the Sylvaneth Wildwoods, and then there was the Deepkin Boat. And I'll be honest, back in the day, I was a bit dubious. I was like, are they going to have me lugging all these things around? And then even thinking about it in lore, are these armies lugging these things around? The case of the Wildwoods, okay, thematically the whole point is that they kind of make life burst from the ground. So I'll give you that one. The Ghost Ship is probably the weakest meh ever. But then there's some that you're like, okay, does every Gloomspite Gets battle happen around a giant moonstone kind of a thing? Where it's just, how is this getting to the battlefield? Are they just pulling these terrain pieces around? And for the Blades of Khorne, the answer is no. When enough blood has been shed onto the ground in a given area, and it is like super soaked, turning into blood mud, a slaughter priest can call and pull a skull altar up from the blood. And I imagine this kind of looking like when the T-1000 forms up from the puddle of mercury in Terminator 2. It's the same way that the bloodletters were described as coming up when the blood secretor plants the banner. It rises from the ground, then given this form, but by the blood that has been shed so far. So this is another blood god construct, almost a manifestation in and of itself, which I always thought was rad. I love when the terrain pieces have really good explanations as to why they're always around. And like summoning this from murder is already really cool. Now, of course, thematically, it's kind of described as something that happens after the blood has already started flowing, so it could represent something mid-battle, or, of course, thematically, priests could just bring people to sacrifice to get this started if they want to have the skull altar in place for the battle. Either way, prayers have always been a really important part of this army, even before prayers, kind of as we knew them, existed. They always had some pseudo-mechanic or ability to kind of mimic beseeching God in a non-magic way for his favor. And I definitely think these are just extensions of that. Now I want to pivot, story-wise, into asking a broad question about what has Khorne and the Blades of Khorne really done to drive events within the setting? And to kind of briefly oversimplify, they did a lot in the beginning and kind of sporadically contributed to the grand story ever since. Like, Khorne was undeniably ascendant when the game launched, right? The original AOS 1 launch box was Stormcast Eternals and the Khorne Bloodbound. Those early stories were centered around Akshi, Guran, and Chaman, but none were ever the focus quite like Akshi was in the beginning. Korghos Khul, in a lot of respects, was our insight into what the forces of chaos make of the Stormcast Eternals, right? He was one of the first heroes to see them. Like, this is a totally new threat they have never faced before. Early glimpses into a new enemy trying to understand what it's like to fight them. Not to mention that Hammerhall is essentially built right in the middle of Korghos Khul's kingdom. The clashing between his Bloodbound and Vandus, like, it just dominated those early lore books. It culminated in a huge battle at the Brimstone Gate, which is a realm gate that leads from Akshi to Archaon's headquarters, the 8 Points, and Korghos Khul lost this fight. Meaning the first pivotal moment was arriving here because the Gates of Azir had been opened. The second pivotal moment was cutting off Archaon's main artery for sending reinforcements. That's what the importance of this realm gate was. That was the real last major action that they had, when I feel Khorne was really the spotlight. Problem is, the downside to being the first antagonist in a GW game is that it can feel like forever before James Workshop's countenance shines upon you again. Because then it's some other army's turn, of course. But off the top of my head, Khorne seems to have been up to a fair bit. I mean, he has warbands in every single realm. Hammerhall is almost under constant assault. The last campaign series we had, in the first book, Vedra was supposed to be leading this grand crusade, the size of which no one had ever seen, and in that first book, she got her army kind of split in half, and she took half of it back to Hammerhall. That's because she got report of a nation-sized Khorne army bearing down on Hammerhall, and it was led by Korghos Khul. It took 2 forces of order, the cities of Sigmar and the Stormcast Eternals, and a mountain range blowing up from the Skaven to curb that Khorne army. And even in that defeat, Korghos Khul still ascended to Demon Prince-ness as a result of it. So don't count out the Akshi Blades of Khorne. In other places, I know I mentioned the Neferata book. There's a large Khorne empire in that. Gates of Azir and Warstorm are both fantastic books for Khorne content. And I mean, to be honest, when it comes to the events, Khorne's always going to be a mover and shaker. If not directly, then there are stories of Khorne warlords trying to become one of the Varengard. Like, they show up quite frequently because, again, it's Khorne, one of the main pillars of Chaos armies, and certainly one of the most direct and useful. You have some great books to read, there are some fantastic characters to follow, and a lot of hints that cool things are on the way. Now, all of the things that we've talked about thus far are all very like lore focused. I want to have a quick bit here about what it is like to play them on the table. How do you get started with a Blades of Khorne army and start enjoying the faction? If you wanted to play the army after hearing all that stuff, how would I suggest you do it? Well, when I lead players through initial purchases, my goal is to get you excited for the army as quickly as possible, playing games and learning. I have links to everything I'm going to talk about in the description down below. If you wouldn't mind using any of those links or the ones in my link tree, they'll save you very real money, and there's a tip in my tip jar and goes a long way to supporting my family. Now, as always, the Spearhead makes the most sense as a place to start, but the current one that just got released with this book, the Fangs of the Blood God, is an interesting one that kind of stands out from the other armies. Normally a Spearhead is like a mini representation of what the greater faction is like. This is one where they really leaned into one corner of the army, and it just kind of leaves me with a question mark on my head. If you like Fleshhounds at all, or you know that you like the army in totality, this is an automatic yes. Mainly because it's a playable force in the Spearhead format. It's got some cool minis. They do have a scaled down version of the Blood God rules that you'll get used to when you play the mass army game. And it's a one-click bundle for all the Fleshhounds you'll probably ever need, unless you want to spam them, in which case you're going to want all of these things anyway. You're going to want Karanak as well. It just seems odd because Spearhead boxes are also like your learning tool for the game, and it's just a very specific, like I said, corner or direction to lean into with the faction, where the bulk of the army is angry men running with swords or dudes riding demons, specifically juggernauts. So I don't really know. If you're not enamored with the Spearhead, or you have it but you want to expand from it kind of quickly because the dogs are not your thing, my biggest suggestion to you is to start with your Slaughter Priest. Khorne has generally always had some fantastic prayers. There is no unit in this army and no Khorne army that you can build that would not be better for having a Slaughter Priest in it. They are a toolbox unit and they're wonderful. They are your access to powerful buffs, to be like a force multiplier for your units. That's how you can access your manifestations if you choose to summon them. So I really cannot suggest that character enough. The next decision to make is really based around what kind of army you want. Because, in this edition of AOS, we're talking about 4th right now, your units that you have access to are sort of locked behind the heroes that lead them. So you have to kind of plan your regiments out. As I mentioned before, I hear a lot of good things about getting a Lord on Juggernaut, running a cavalry heavy or centric list, or you can go unit spam with warriors and reavers, or have a mix somewhere in there. All these units rock, and it's just a lot to juggle if you take a true smattering, so I would suggest kind of picking a direction. Certainly when you're starting, the fewer war scrolls you have to memorize, the more fluid your games will be in terms of learning experience. So I would just say pick whatever you think sounds cool about the faction and kind of lean that direction. It's just a shame that the starter box did that for you, assuming you would lean into the dogs. That's just one direction the army can go. Personally, Blood Warriors have always been my favorite. Now, what kinds of units you really enjoy and want to put on the table is going to inform your hero choices that I mentioned before. Unless you really want to go all demons, or almost all demons, next choice I really recommend is going to be the Goreblade Warband. This is actually the Khorne half of the original starter set for AOS. Personally, I think these models are still bangers, and this gives you 2 core infantry options. So you have your Blood Warriors and your Reavers. So that's 2 Blood Tithe points, or 3 Blood Tithe points, right? Because aren't Warriors 5-man now? But yeah, you got those, and a whole bunch of hero options to start buffing them up. And this is where you're really going to get into the meat and potatoes of understanding how to play Khorne, is the synergies that work between the heroes and the units. And this gives you the Mighty Lord of Khorne, I think the Banner Bearer in there, the Blood Secretor, the guy with the whip is in there. There's a bunch of stuff. It's a nice little toolbox and a glimpse into, the starting of Khorne in Age of Sigmar. Now, in this current version of the Battle Tome, 2025 here, Khorne's army rules are based around, first of all, units getting killed, yours and your opponents, because Lord cares not from where the blood flows. but that manifests in a couple different ways. First off is the traditional one we've had for a while now with Age of Sigmar, which is blood tithe points. Every single time a unit is completely destroyed, you get a blood tithe point, yours or your opponent's. You can then spend these blood tithe points to unlock abilities for the rest of the game. And it's a one-time purchase. You're not, in previous books, you would have to keep track of how much you have currently and then deduct the cost of abilities you were using from that pool. This is not like that. You just spend it once and you get that ability for the rest of the game. So if it's a hero phase ability, from now on, every hero phase it's relevant. A great example here is unlocking Divine Storm, which lowers the power level of wizards near Khorne units on a 3 or more. Once you unlock it, you use it just like any other ability going forward till the end of the game. The second kind of manifestation of getting units killed is the newer one, and I kind of like it. This is just a flat army rule that says whenever half the total number of units that started the game, yours and your opponent's, when that number is killed, then weapons with the blood-hungry profile get a crazy wild buff. They get just stronger at everything. Basically, the idea being when half the table is gone, the half that you have remaining are going to fight like monsters. And that it sits on top of other rules that you can unlock via blood tithe points. It can seem like a lot to keep track of. I actually, down below, this isn't a affiliate or anything like that. I found a maker of cool reminder token things in the UK. This is a faction that I would definitely want one of those because you can unlock different abilities at different times based on, what you need in this particular game. I like having those little MDF printed reminders that kind of you can put off to the side just to keep track of your own thoughts. No matter what blades of Khorne army you run, there's going to be a learning curve as you decide what blessings are important, how they stack together, kind of how long your units can last on the tabletop. And beyond that, my real suggestions are just to pick your favorite non-hero unit. Meaning what models do you want to shine in your games? What do you like? Then you pick heroes that synergize around that unit based on keywords, regiment access, and so on. If what you like about the faction is the heroes, something like Bloodthirsters, I love that for you. Your choices are going to be centered around how to deliver them, to the enemy without getting shot off the board. How do you collect blood tithe points on an elite army? That kind of stuff. Because Khorne armies have always been interesting. They're always much more more complicated under the hood than they sound. The premise of running forward and applying axe to skull sounds very simple. But the way that these units really swing above their weight class is by layering the buffs. They are +1 to hit there, +1 to wound here, an additional attack from this part. Halfway through the game, my blood-starved weapons go wild. You can give units run and charge. And this means you can take hyper-disposable units like Blood Reavers and max them out, and then fire them off like a rocket. Now, does it always work that way? Nope. Does it sometimes feel like a Rube Goldberg machine when you're trying to do a way overcomplicated thing to just have a unit of Reavers go punch somebody? Yes. Is it satisfying when it works? Absolutely. Now, of course, you could also lean into more elite units, but you're going to want something there to either absorb charges from your enemy or to just get blood tithe points. Now, friends, this has been a very long video. Thank you so much for sticking with me, but I like to end all of mine by simply asking the question, why is this cool? Why should you play Blades of Khorne? In short, this is the black metal album cover of armies. Okay, it is colorful, evocative, iconic, and some of these designs harken back to the oldest eras of Warhammer. They were the premier threat of the first edition. They have some of the most compelling lore and ties actively to the setting. I mean, now certainly that we're refocusing in Akshi, I expect Khorne to be very relevant. The miniatures are stunning, right? Some of the demons can be a little bit dated, but I mean, that's a criticism that goes across all the demon armies. The mortal side has some of my favorite sculpts, and the ones that really drew me to Age of Sigmar when the game launched, when everybody else was crapping all over it. I was like, man, there's something real cool there, though. And like I said, I maintain once GW is bold enough to give me a Korgus Cull Ascended, I will have a Khorne army under my banner. Because he really is one of my favorite characters. Go read Red Feast, I have a link to it down below. On the tabletop, it's about aggression. It's about assembling a toolbox and maximizing what it can do, whatever that looks like. And while you don't hear about Khorne winning event after event or whatever like that in terms of competitiveness, I can tell you from experience, this is a skill check army. If you are not prepared for what happens when a Khorne player knows what they're doing, you're gonna have a bad time, right? People on the internet can say, oh, just shoot the heroes or do X. But if you are not ready for an army that has rules that can evolve dynamically, again, you choose the blessings that you need for this enemy, and you're not prepared for how the buffs overlap with things, it's a lot. These dudes get scary, especially mid to late game. When those, getting those objectives accomplished, wiping units out and that kind of stuff means more and more. And to be honest, for how recognizable Khorne is among Warhammer fans, you don't see a ton of Blades of Khorne army on the table too much. Like, there's no one's ever like, oh my god, another Khorne army. People walk up and they're like, oh hell yeah, Khorne! Which I like. I mean, that makes me feel good, right? I like to be a little special snowflake, I'll say it. I don't want to be a winning Stormcast player number 40. I want to be a super losing last place special snowflake army with my bone splitters, representing 100% of the field. For all these reasons, I recommend go check out a Khorne army for yourself. What's more, it's actually one of the cheapest armies to get into, if I'm completely honest with you. See, one of the things I have in my affiliate links, I have a link to Noble Knight Games where they sell used minis here in the US. And they have a ton of this because of just people cleaning out their closet from those old AOS starter sets. If you want a mortal blood-bound horde, this is probably the most affordable army to get. Just because of how many people have them out there or were using them for conversion bits and stuff like that. So anyway, thank you so much for watching and listening. Please leave some comments in the description down below. Tell me, first of all, if you like this format of video, the much longer versions, as opposed to the 15, 18-minute videos. Tell me, if you're a Khorne player, do you like your newest battle tome? I love it. It can be a bit much to track, but to be honest, if I was to get this army and invest in a nice set of tokens or something like that for helping me remember my rules, or what buffs are on the table, it runs fairly straightforward otherwise. And I like that. It's one I've always had my eye on. I don't know, man. We're staring down the barrel of a big Nurgle release, but if they had something just as similar in magnitude for Khorne, I don't know if I could resist. So let me know what you think of the current battle tome, and if you have any more suggestions for where to start for new players. I always pin the most helpful comments to the top of my videos as a resource for new folks, so please let me know how you would start Blades of Khorne, if you would go for the Spearhead or not, and just your thoughts on it. Thank you so much for listening. I'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming, friends.